G'day Internet, Max Wright here, and I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while. One of my very dear friends, unfortunately I haven't seen him for so long, but a very dear friend, a champion of liberty for goodness, I don't even know, 60 years by now, 70 years, it's crazy. J. Edward Griffin, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me back. And it's good to see your face too, and to know that you're still on the ramparts.
Yeah, good stuff. Trying my very best, trying my very best. And for those of you who don't know, and in fact, I say he's a good friend, and I feel bad. I did not know about this until just 10 minutes ago. Actually, Ed had COVID and was in the hospital for several months, and it was looking really, really, really bad there for quite a little while. So I just found out right now. I'm still in a little bit of shock, but so glad that he's with us. 90 years old, and got yourself out of the hospital, which is an absolute tribute. So I just feel grateful that you're here, and thank you so much. So if the viewers there, if Ed experienced a little bit of shortness of breath or whatever throughout this interview, I'm sure you all will be tolerant. Yeah, just so good to have you here.
Well, thank you. I feel lucky to be here. Yeah, I thought I was a goner there for a little while, but no, I'm still here to deal with.
And straight back to work, straight back in front of the camera, educating as many people as you can. It's just an absolute. It's so cool, so cool. All right, so we kind of talked off camera there a little bit about your story, your hospital story, your COVID story. We decided that we weren't going to go into it too deeply because, well, I mean, just so sad we can get our channels demonetized. It's not demonetized, I don't care about that, but the channel deleted, which would just restrict my ability to communicate with people and all that. It's like, this topic's too hot. I can't talk about it. And we had a little moment of sadness. It's just like, well, what happened? How did we get to here? Like, it just once upon a time, I feel like that spirit of freedom and the values of the founders was in the hearts of so many Americans, and that just does not seem to be the case right now. And I'm sure there's a lot of different vectors that contribute to that, media and social media and the education system. But I don't know, maybe we could just talk a little bit about that for the moment. Just the education system right now, like what's happening when people are coming out of college. It seems to me they're not only do they not understand anything of value or importance, they're completely unemployable. They're going hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt, and you couldn't even let them into your office. They will destroy the culture. They'll be bitching and moaning and complaining, and they've just made themselves completely unemployable. And it's a very sad situation. Any thoughts on that in the education system?
Well, yeah, that's you've touched on the nerve, I think, of the whole problem. Our culture has been subverted, and that's the short definition of all of this. But the question is how and by whom and for what purpose, and where are we in the process, and can it be stopped? Can it be reversed? Those are the interesting questions. I think it's obvious to everybody that our culture has been subverted. Yes, in the good old days, even before I was born, that's so long ago, was probably the dates were carved in stone, but even before I was born, the culture was pretty well subverted. I didn't know it. For the longest time, I was raised in the environment where everybody said, well, this is America, and other countries may have totalitarian regimes and may have tyrants and they may have restrictions on their liberties, but this is America, and we're the lucky ones, and we'll never have that. Well, little did I know when I was repeating that mantra, not maybe verbatim, but thinking that way, that we had already lost that. It's just that I didn't realize it. And now that I'm older and I've decided to read a few books and really look at history for a change instead of how it was presented to me in the public school system, well, then I realized that, yeah, this process was started long ago, and it was really a march toward communism. I'll come back to that word in a moment. Our communist opponents decided long ago, and they wrote essays on it and gave speeches on it and books on it and opened universities to teach it and all that sort of thing. They decided that the best way to bring communism to America was a slow march through the culture. In other words, they would have to change the thinking of the American people substantially before they would accept the premise of a totalitarian regime and think it was okay. So it was a slow march by them to change the culture. And by that, that means the destruction of the family, disdain for religious values, disdain for the idea that we should work hard and save our money and so forth and be conservative individuals. It was an abandonment of the idea that we are responsible for ourselves and that government was our servant. We were the masters. All of those things had to be changed. And I discovered, to my surprise, about halfway through my learning process, that although this was a march toward communism, and they called it that, it was being financed and engineered by people that we would never call communists, by very, very wealthy people, people in Wall Street, people like J.P. Morgan, people by Rockefeller, people, you know, like that, by the Rothschilds and so forth. The wealthiest people of the world had decided that the future of their continued dominance over society, which was already quite extensive, that the future to continue that required the abandonment of all the principles that you and I were talking about and which we thought we had inherited. Well, by the time I woke up to that, I realized that much of that erosion had already taken place. And I was evidence of it because I had gone through the school system and I was in considered to be one of the nicest universities, the University of Michigan. And I didn't realize that I was being indoctrinated at the time. But now that I realized what the master plan was, I certainly was. I was being taught the elements of collectivism, that capitalism was selfish, you know, and people who believed in free enterprise were selfish because they just wanted to have all the money and so forth. And actually it was the leaders of this communist movement who were doing exactly that. But I didn't know that. I was gobbling it up and repeating the mantra quite successfully. So anyway, I guess I'm wandering too long through this wheat field. The bottom line is that the process that we're confronting today is not new. It's just a continuum of something that started at the turn of the last century, when people like Rockefeller and Morgan and others, they decided to fund the control of the universities, and they wrote books about this, and they decided to buy up academics. And then most academics, especially in that day, were living almost as paupers. You couldn't make a good living being an academic, and it was being a teacher was almost like being in the poorhouse. I know that because I was raised by a high school teacher, and we had very little money, and she worked like a fiend, but was not well compensated. So anyway, when people come along with lots of money, you know, and offer maybe a $5,000 a year salary to somebody that normally would expect only to have a $1,000 a year salary back in those days, well, they were really listening carefully. He said, well, yes, sir. What would you like me to do? And these
you know
people,
what, could I interrupt there for a second?
Oh, sure.
I think that's a really important thing to note. So just because of that concept, incentives matter. I'm like, I want my viewers to understand that today I am a very wealthy man, and it didn't come about because I read books from Warren Buffett or Paul Tudor Jones or investment gurus. I would credit you, Ed, to being one of the #1 influences for my success in life. For whatever reason, I was very, very fortunate enough to come across you as a young man on dial-up internet, as a young man, 20 years old. One of the very first things that I happened to come across was your presentation called The Creature from Jeckyl Island, with a second look at the Federal Reserve. And from then in, I just did a deep dive on your work. And it was, you gave me the model of how the world really worked. And it was that helped me in my investment career in my understanding of the world, in anticipating future events. You gave me the master plan of how the world really, really works. And the reason I wanted to tell that story, thank you, yes, but the reason I wanted to interrupt that there is I want the viewers at home to really understand that this isn't just some academic conversation like, oh, you know, here's how the world works, here's how the education system works. It's interesting. This is the method for your personal salvation, in my opinion. This helps you become sovereign. This helps you become wealthy. This helps you raise a great family. It's helped me do all of those things. And I really do credit you with all of that. You were the start of all of it. And not just this, I was lucky that you were the start, but even, 20 years later and way more research, I still go back to your research and all the stories you're telling right now. I know them all off by heart in my head. The taking over of the medical schools and the universities. A big component of that was the Flexner report. That's you teaching me that in your writings, in your documentaries. The communists taking over. That's revealed in an interview that you did with Yuri. How many years ago was that now? 40, 50 years ago. That's crazy. And all of these things, I learned how the world really works because of you and your documentaries and your research. And it's just enriched my life more than any other single thing that's any other contact from another human being in my life. Your work has influenced me more than anything. So I wanted to interject and I say, guys, for your sake, not because this is an interesting, cool story about history, for your sake, for your wealth, for your family, just listen to every word Ed says. It is absolutely incredible. So sorry for the interruption, and please keep going with the story about your mother.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. It's rewarding to hear stories like that. And of course, from my perspective, it's essential just to survive as a free human being. I agree with you. It's going to be very hard. It always has been hard to become a wealthy, independent person. But in the good old days, almost anybody could do it, as long as they were willing to work hard and follow the rules, and be generous and form friendships and coalitions in your business world, the usual stuff. But nowadays, a man rises to great wealth, or a woman rises to great wealth today, primarily not by being productive or satisfying the needs of society and making a profit on transactions that serve other people, but now it's because of political influence. Who do you know in Congress or in the Senate? Who will pass a piece of legislation that supposedly sounds like it's in the interest of the common man, but really is a backroom deal, so that you can plunder the population and without them even knowing it, and you've got government behind you. So that's how wealth is acquired today. It's political achievement rather than a productive achievement. So anyway, it's good to hear you acknowledge that, and I'm really delighted to hear it. But from here on out, our challenge is a little different. It's how do we survive the pending Great Reset, as they like to call it. It's a reset, all right, but not to what they're saying. It's a reset back to the Middle Ages, where you have the master living in the big house, and everybody else is a serf. They own nothing, and they pretend like they're happy. As Klaus Schwab would say, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. Well, that's kind of like the serfs of the Middle Ages. They own nothing. They didn't own their land. They didn't own the house that they lived in, or the little shack that they lived in. They didn't own the tools of production. They were just serfs on the land of the duke or the king and so forth. And that's what the Great Reset really is. They're trying to reset us back to that kind of an environment, politically, socially, and economically. So now the question is, how do you become an independent, wealthy person, but how do we reverse this process in time before we all become slaves in shackles? And there's no way to escape, because they have the technology and the weapons to control the masses with a very few people with their fingers on the trigger. So anyway, that's just a side thought that comes to mind. And I guess to pick up my monologue. I've forgotten where we were, except I'll try and just pick it up with the obvious point, which is we were taught, I was taught, and apparently you also, as we went through the school system, we were taught a fantasy. We were taught that America still was what it used to be when it started off. Now, that doesn't mean that America was perfect in the beginning. I mean, the first thing that they always throw up to you is that, well, yeah, but you had slavery. Well, that's true. So that's not good. That doesn't mean that the effort, the movement toward liberty for all was bad just because we didn't accomplish it in the first step. It was a great beta model, I thought, and it was necessary to hammer together the constitutional the principles under great opposition from many sources who didn't want us to abandon slavery because it was very profitable. But the founders of the movement all had it pretty clear that slavery had to go. So yeah, there were problems, and along the way, of course, there were crooked politicians. There always been those, and so forth. But in the beginning, we had a very low rate of government control over our lives, and that's the reason, in my view, that America sprang forth among all nations of the world and throughout history, and became such a powerhouse and such a magnet for people who were suppressed all around the world. They had to get to the United States so they could be free, so they could make money, how they could support their families and be free to speak their mind and so forth. And it was an explosion of prosperity and freedom that the world had never seen before. But right away, from the very beginning, there were those who said, this is a mistake. We're losing control over the people. And they started to chisel away on all those principles. And so they'd like to have us believe that there was no value in the beta model. Well, I consider that the beta model was very valuable. And it, if nothing else, it taught us that the underlying principles were extremely successful and workable. It also taught us where the weaknesses were. So the next time around, which means now, the next time around, we're going to have an opportunity to rebuild, and we'll have the next model, and we will have could have learned from our mistakes. And so one of the biggest mistakes, of course, is how did we let that predator class creep into control and destroy everything? That's the big challenge of our day. So I think I've talked around it enough, but I came right finally to the point, which is the focus of my work right now, is how do we create that counter movement, which is strong enough to reverse this decay trend and bring us back to where we were, and then beyond to a higher level of liberty and prosperity that the world has never seen before. It can be done, I think.
Can be done. So, well, one of the ways you have an event coming up, let's talk about that for the moment. But you've been doing this event, the Red Pill Expo. You've been doing it for many years now. Tell us a little bit about that. What happens there, and talk about it with respect to that right now.
Well, Red Pill Expo is it's a component and a strategy that I put together back in 2002. Here I go again. I'm going to digress a little bit from the main track, just so that we can see where the track is going. By the time I had been in this battle since 1960, I had learned a lot along the way, mostly things not to do, mistakes were made, and so forth. But one of the things that bothered me the most is that although we had truth on our side, we had history on our side, we had all the evidence on our side that our beta model was the best thing that ever happened, we were still losing the war. How is that possible? The masses were still saluting the flag, talking about America, land of the free and the home of the brave, and everybody enjoying the fruits of liberty. And yet the enemies of liberty were winning every time there was a conflict. They had moved into banking, they'd moved into the school system, they were in the process of taking over the media. You know, they were everywhere. How were we losing? And I just had to dwell on that the longest period of time. And it finally dawned on me. We were losing because we didn't have a strategy for winning. Nobody thought they had to win anything. They thought they already had it. And I couldn't, nor anybody else could convince the average person on the street that it was necessary to stop what they're doing and take an interest in their environment, their political and social environment, and become informed and become activists on it and do something about it. That was the first thing. So that was easy. We could see that. The second thing that dawned on me, though, is that our opponents, and I'll call them the collectivists, the ones that were trying to build a collectivist world regime, were masters of human psychology and social management. And they were the ones that were producing all the professors of psychology and sociology and all that sort of thing. They realized that the first thing you must do in conquering America or changing it is not to invade it from outside with soldiers and bombs and bayonets, but to invade it from the inside with ideas and thoughts and principles. And then organizational principles. Then finally I got down to it. And I realized that a very small group of people, far less than 1% of the population, were effectively influencing the total population. How is that possible? And so I started to focus on that. It took me about a year to figure it out, but it should have taken a lot less because it was right on the surface. And that is that they realized something. In fact, one of the great planners of this whole movement was Cecil Rhodes. Everybody recognizes the Rhodes Scholarship and so forth. Cecil Rhodes was one of the wealthiest men in the world. He's dead now, of course. He was part of the British Empire and was the man who was in charge of South Africa. And he pretty well stole all of the rights to the African minerals and natural resources, made a tremendous amount of money. But what they don't realize is that when he died, he didn't give that money to his family or to any other normal cause. He created a secret society with it. And that society was, the purpose of the society was to do what I'm talking about, to rule the world without the world knowing it's being ruled from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And we know about a lot of this because there was a fellow by the name of William Stead, or Stead, I never did find out how you pronounce his name, S-T-E-A-D, who was the executor of the wills, actually 7 wills of Cecil Rhodes. He had control of the estate, and he wrote a book called The Wills of Cecil Rhodes. You can go buy that book and you read all about it. It's right there. It's right in your face. He pointed out that all that money that Rhodes made went into the creation of a secret society. And it was so secret that Rhodes decided that they wouldn't even give it a name, because without a name, it's difficult to describe it, to talk about it. Well, who are you talking about? Are these the Rosicrucians? Are these the Masons? Who are these people? Well, they don't have a name. So even the authors, the few that wrote about it, didn't know what to call it. So they wound up calling it the Rhodes Group. I call them the Rhodesians. Okay. Anyway, so we know about it because it's the people who were doing it were boasting about it and they were writing about it. And Rhodes himself left a lot of handwritten notes. And he created a secret society without a name. And the purpose was to take over every nation of the world from inside, becoming dominant in influence over the most powerful power centers of society, such as the political parties, the school system, the media, and so forth, all the way down to the local organizations like the Kiwanis Club and the PTAs and so forth. And it was based on the psychological principle that the humans are a herd animal. We have a herd instinct, and humans travel in groups, herds, or flocks, whatever you want to call them. And they always choose a leader to follow. They must have a leader because it's part of our instinct. And now, if you want to trace that back, it's a protective instinct because when vulnerable animals are traveling where there are predators, to be in a large group is a protection. You might lose 1 or 2 on the periphery, but you're not going to lose the whole group. So there's an instinct there to always cluster together as a form of defense. But it's very strong in the human species. And so they figured that since humans want to have a leader, their job was simply to focus on leadership and offer leaders to them. And they figured that if we finance these potential leaders with enough money, they can do what is necessary to be recognized as legitimate leaders, and the masses will follow their leaders. Even if the masses don't like their leaders, it's their leaders. And if they figure that if they can convince the people that they voted for their leaders and that they really did vote for them into office, they would say, well, I voted for this guy, so I guess he's a good guy. I would never have voted for a bad person. So since I voted for him, he must be a good person, and so forth. So they mastered the psychological strategy of how to manipulate and influence the masses from the center of a very small group. And Cecil Rhodes even not admitted, I guess he boasted in his own writings. He said he borrowed this idea from Adam Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt, for many of your listeners and viewers, will recognize that he is the guy that's credited with forming the Illuminati quite a few years ago. And in his writings, Adam Weishaupt said that we are building an organization with a central group, and we have just a few people in there, myself and a few trusted associates. And that's really where all the directions come from. Because now we create another organization around it called a ring. He called it a ring. And it might be made up of 20 people or 30 people. And those people do not suspect that they're being dominated by the 3 people in the center. But if they were thinking about it, they could figure it out. But they don't think that's part of the strategy. And that first ring surrounds itself with another ring around it, which might have 500 or 1,000 people in it. And those people all think they're the primary enchilada. They don't realize that they're being led and dominated by, 20 or 30 people. And then that ring forms another ring around it. And they keep, and Weishaupt called it rings within rings. And that's the way to influence large numbers of people, so that the people in the outer rings, like the political parties, don't realize that they're being dominated by inner rings, and those are dominated by inner rings. So Cecil Rhodes liked that idea, and it said so in his writings. He said, we will adopt this rings within rings strategy, which is exactly what I'm talking about. And now when I finally got a handle on all that, I said, aha, this is why we're losing. We're trying to reach the masses of the people in one ring. We want to reach out, in one fell swoop, we're trying to reach everybody at once with the same appeal, the same information, the same logic, and human nature is not like that. Our opponents understand it, and we didn't. So I thought I had finally found the keys to the kingdom. This was the reason that we were always losing, is because we were always trying to deliver the same message in the same way to everybody, regardless of their interest level, their educational level, their understanding, their lifestyle. And it doesn't work that way in the real world. And that, I believe, is still, I believe it more so now than ever before, was the main reason that the forces of liberty and sanity lose almost every time against the forces of insanity and dominance and tyranny, because those people are shrewd. They will play they will play one group against the other. They will lie, cheat, steal, and all that, and they'll murder. And that doesn't mean that we have to do that, or that we should even consider doing that. But it does mean we need to consider that there are different strata in society, and each one has a different style, a different interest level. So once I got hold of that idea, I said, okay, let's see if we could transport that idea and put it into our movement. And that's where it got interesting. So the first thing I had to do was, well, what is this central group that Weishaupt was talking about? Who is that? Well, since we happen to be putting it together, I guess it's us. Didn't want it, but who else? So we formed a little group called Freedom Force International. And within that group, of course, there's a board of directors. It's a simple formula. And we were very successful back in 2002. We put together a couple of hundred people. But we were every one of us were and still are, totally dedicated to this thing. We live and sleep this issue of freedom versus tyranny, collectivism versus individualism. What are we going to do tomorrow? Who are we going to recruit and so forth? But you can't expect all the American people to be that kind of a thing. I mean, you have to be a book reader. You have to you want to get into the nitty gritties, become involved in the ideologies and the philosophies. Very people have time for that or interest in it. They've got, families to support, jobs to perform. So, okay. Then the next question was, well, how do we reach out beyond Freedom Force International, which is you might say, the center of the whole thing? And we had, okay, how do we popularize this message without destroying it? We have to be genuine, but still we have to popularize it. And that was a tough thing to do. I thought about it. We were having a board meeting one day and talking about that issue. And I remember it just popped into my mind, why don't we have a Red Pill Expo? And the conversation stopped. We looked at each other. They looked at me. Gee, that's an interesting idea. And we knew we had hit it. That was it. The red pill, not everybody, but most people understand the red pill meme. Take the red pill and find out what the world is really like and break out of your fantasies and your illusions and face reality for a change. So we thought, I wonder if that would be considered too campy, too childish for most people. I didn't think it would be. And the only way to find out is to try it. So we did. We put on the first Expo, Red Pill Expo, in 2017 in Bozeman, Montana. And it was wildly successful. We thought we might get a couple hundred people, if that, coming out to hear all about this, what the world is really about, sort of thing. But we packed the place with a huge auditorium. I don't really know the number, but it was at least 600 or more. It looked like 6,000 to us, and it was a huge success. People came from many different countries. It was exactly what we couldn't even dare to hope for, and it happened. So we knew then that we had struck the chord, that we had popularized very serious and real principles in a way that the average person, who I guess you would not say the average person, but the average truth seeker, who doesn't really have time to spend their life digging this stuff out, but would like to know more. So we did the Red Pill Expo primarily to appeal to truth seekers, people that have that crusader gene going inside them, vibrating. They want to do something, but they just don't know what to do. So that's the philosophy. And then after that, we thought, well, the expos, we can only do 1 or 2 of those a year. This battle is raging. We need something to go 24/7. So then the idea popped up, well, let's do a Red Pill University, which will be an online presence and a series of ongoing communiques and organizational steps. We can form campuses in every community where we have boots on the ground. We'll form real live organizations in every county in the United States or around the world. We have very big plans, but that's another ring, you see. So if you understand what our philosophy is, different from the Weissops of the world and the Rhodes of the world, we let everybody know right up front what we're doing. We have nothing to hide. We see nothing wrong with this kind of a structure, as long as we're totally honest to everybody what we're trying to do. So now, after all of that as background, we come to your question about the next Red Pill Expo. And yes, it's coming up very soon in July 9 and 10 in Indianapolis, Indiana. And it's number 8 in our sequence. Now, I have to admit that the recent rise in gas prices and airline prices has discouraged some people from coming. It's just beyond their reach. But others, we're reaching out to a larger group than ever before. So we still expect a very strong physical attendance. And that's where it's important, because one of the other things I learned from our opponent is that you cannot You cannot wage this battle on the internet. It has to be done eyeball to eyeball, like they own the classrooms. They got the students sitting out there day in and day out, and they're talking to them, and they shake hands with them, and they maybe will have a cup of coffee with them and so forth. And Americans have been trying to fight against that by signing up to something and getting a publication or sending a donation to a candidate. That's good. It's all very good, but we're never going to beat these people until we have boots on the ground, eyeball to eyeball contact. And the only way you're going to meet people of like mind is if you come to Red Pill Expo or similar assemblies. So if it's at all possible, we're urging everybody to bite the bullet, come to the event. Once you get there, you think, this is really worth it. You should see our testimonials that we get from people as they leave our expos. I don't think I've seen a negative one, except to the extent of wish it were longer, that kind of a thing. How about next time making it a week long and so forth? It's exactly what we need. It's that ring outside of, well, it's the ring outside of the central group. And it's for truth seekers who want to know how the world really works. Now, how do we administer our obligation to deliver on that promise? We've put together some of the most bright minds, the most brilliant presenters that we can find who have a red pill to talk about. Most of these people, no, not most, all of them have discovered a red pill in their lives, most often in their professional lives, and they were so shocked by it and surprised by it and concerned by it that they now want to just spend the rest of their lives telling everybody about it. So those are the people that we will have on our stage, and they'll talk about everything from our health crisis that we're in right now to the economic crisis. We'll talk about the propaganda war that's going on. We'll talk about some really weird things. Like at our last event, we had a lady talk about the red pill of the Lusitania never sank. So not the Lusitania, the Titanic, excuse me, not Lusitania sank, yes. But the Titanic never sank. I thought that's absurd. Everybody knows that the Titanic sank, but no, we find out, no, it was the Olympic that sank. It was an insurance fraud. The Titanic was damaged and it was no longer serviceable. They couldn't get insurance on it. So they switched the name. The Olympic was in the same dry dock with the Titanic. It was not far behind in delivery date. So finally, it was finally finished, and they switched the name from Olympic to Titanic, sent the limping ship out to sea, and made sure that she sank so they could collect the insurance on it. And that was J.P. Morgan that did all that with the white, they call it the White Shipping Company, white ships. And she has the proof. There's no question about it. This was a fraud. So we have things that are all over the map, which is one of the issues that people like about Red Pill Expo. It's not always on one thing, And if you get bored about hearing about one thing, sit around a little longer because the next guy up there on the stage gonna knock your socks off. So
good stuff.
To wind this up, I urge everybody to come. You have to go online and take a look at the website. It's redpillexpo.org.
Good stuff. And I've been a speaker there before, and it is a really, really fun event. Lots of good people. So I highly recommend it. Let's get a little bit now into, if you still have time, if it's feeling okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Let's get a little bit more into sorry, before we get that, I wanted to throw in my own little 5 cents there on some of the comments you've touched on. Where I really started to understand like how the world works and the trajectory and the trend is I just thought about that slow pressure. And actually, interestingly enough, I've got Invisalign on right now. So I've got, it's like orthodontics, it's to straighten your teeth. And it was just described to me. It's like, well, they figured out the best way to move teeth is just constant slow pressure. I can't even feel it, but it's just a constant slow pressure to align my teeth a little bit better way. And that constant slow pressure is, I think, that's what I really started to, not from the orthodontics, that's a good analogy, I think. But 20 years ago, when I first started learning from you, I really understood that constant slow pressure. And it's like, so if you've got people who have an agenda to implement this collectivism, and you have people who are not aware that they love their country, but whatever, they're just, if they own a business, who are you hiring? If you're the head of HR, who are you hiring? If you are a political party, you need to give somebody a leg up, who are you hiring? If you just love liberty, love your country, but you're just kind of not that focused on it, you might hire people who don't really love your country. You might promote people who don't really promote the feelings of freedom or whatever. But when you're the group who has the agenda, and you find someone who is going to be a lifelong ally to this cause, and you start reaching down and yanking them up, and you're like, okay, I want you to go into, you're not qualified, but I want you to be into this university as a professor. I want you to be over here, A, B, C. And if you multiply that slow pressure of just having an agenda of hiring certain people, promoting certain people, networking, introducing people, you have that agenda. And that is year after year, decade after decade, we're pushing over a century now of that. What you end up with is this just entire class of people who have taken over the power centers of society. They're the editors at all of the magazines, the newspapers, the newsrooms. They've taken over both political parties, all the important influences there, because of decade after decade, networking through networking, they've pulled them up. When I got this, many years ago, I'm not even sure if it's legal, I'm not sure if you're allowed to say it, but I was very, very strict. I'm like, I don't hire people, I don't work with people, I don't elevate people, and I preferably don't spend my money with people who are not lovers of freedom. And it became, that slow, consistent pressure that I can contribute, I will do that wherever I can. And like I said, who knows, it could be illegal because it's like prejudice or some nonsense, but whatever. I'm not too worried about that. I don't believe in that law anyway. So that's how I've kind of operated. And I just think it's an incredibly important thing. I think as soon as more people know that they're in a war, I tell people all the time, I say it on this channel, you've been in a war your entire life and you just didn't know. And one issue somewhere pops up and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. That's not fair. Or something triggers for you. And then you'll find someone from your inner circle or someone like yourself, as I did. And you're like, oh, these things are actually all interconnected. And there is a force, a slow moving force, like a glacier coming down the mountain, this consistent slow pressure of just grinding away the mountain. And as I really started to understand that, then I became very, very good at anticipating and predicting and seeing 5-10 years over the horizon about where this is. And it just allowed me to just make so many good decisions in my life and do so many good things and help a lot of people along the way. So it's all been just that model of the world that Ed just gave you is just so powerful. So yeah, I wanted to touch on that. Really, really important too. And I really encourage you to take on my philosophy of just be careful, go the extra mile to help those people who have that right mindset, who are lovers of freedom. And people who aren't, I'm not that excited about spending my money with them or elevating that much. I'll talk to them and try and convince them and bring them onto the good side. But I would try not to help them financially wherever I can. So little food for thought there. Do you want to chime in on that, or I can ask the next question?
Well, all I can say is here, here, here. Of course, that's the way it should be. And that's natural. There's nothing unethical about that. Of course, you want to associate with people of like mind. That doesn't mean that you hate others that are not of your mind and your opinion and so forth. There's no reason to hate a person because they disagree with you, but you don't have to go out of your way to associate with them either. I mean, as long as you're a free human being. Now, if you're not free, you might have to you'll be forced to associate with them whether you like it or not. So that's one of the things. What you described about the slow gradualism is definitely a strategy that our opponents have consciously used and spoken about. I know that you're familiar with the Fabian Society it's formed in Europe, in England, I should say, and I guess England is not technically part of Europe. But anyway, it was formed in England, and I've forgotten the date, but it was a couple of 100 years ago. And their headquarters, they had a glass, stained glass window, and it graphically depicted many of these strategies that you're talking about. The Fabian Society itself, just the name after Fabian. Who's Fabian? Well, it was a general. I think it was the the wars. I can't think of the word. Penopolian Wars. I'm getting all mixed up. Anyways, my history is on that is very, very bad. Anyway, from those wars, and Hannibal was in the war, and there was this general called Fabian something or other, and he was famous because although he had inferior forces, he usually could defeat his opponent, including Hannibal on a couple of occasions, not by overpowering them, but by wearing them down and being always unavailable for battle. It was always postponed or moved to another location. And finally, Hannibal and others, the larger, more powerful forces would run out of the ability to feed their huge forces, or they wanted to go home or something. And so they would abandon the battlefield as though they had been defeated. And so the Fabians decided that's our strategy. We just wear our opponents down. We won't engage them in battle. We just constantly be pressure on them at all times. And then there's another part in that glass window where there's a wolf wearing a sheep skin around him. And so they've talked about, we are wolves in sheep clothing. We will pretend like we're peace lovers and we'll tell our opponents everything they want to hear. But underneath it all, we are wolves, but they'll never know it. And so they have all kinds of symbols. And the most important symbol, I think, was where they had a couple of their members dressed in monk garb, the robes, simple robes. And there was an anvil in front of them, a big anvil. And on the anvil was the earth, a nice round sphere. You could tell it was the earth. And they had hammers, and they were both ready to strike the earth. And I thought, what is that all about? And then it dawned on me, because across the bottom of the stained glass window, they have the line from Omar Khayyam. I'm going to murder the line now, but it goes something like this. If thou and I, dear love, if thou and I with fate could conspire, would we not grasp this whole thing entire? Would we not shatter it to bits and then remold it closer to the heart's desire? And there you have the core strategy. Shatter the world to bits. People say to me, or say to each other, well, these politicians, they don't know what's going on. They should know that doesn't work. Why are they doing it? It doesn't work. It creates more problems than it solves. And the answer is because they know it, not because they don't know it. Because these people are part of that Fabian society mentality where they want to remold the world more closely to the heart's desire, which is collectivism. And in order to do that, you have to destroy the existing order. So every time we see all of these things happening that are destructive in our society, and we should write a letter to our congressman and let him know, or write a letter to the president and let him know. They don't get it, that they know exactly what's going on. That's why they're doing it. And they just don't know anything about history. That's all.
Yeah. Do you still have, is Reality Zone still available to people?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's one of our main sites. Yeah.
So can I do a little sales pitch for you here?
Thank you.
So basically, Ed has got a collection, and it's some audio tapes, it's some videos, some documentaries he's made. It's basically just a little glimpse into the window of Ed's mind here. And I've been to Ed's house, and you see this incredible bookshelf behind him, and I go, oh my God, you read all those? You understand all those? He's like, he looks at me like I'm strange. He's like, no, have a look behind that door. And I open up that door, and it's the garage, and it's just shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of books, history, all this stuff. And I just said, oh my gosh, that's impressive. He goes, no, you don't understand. There's a warehouse, way more books, and I've read all those too. His knowledge of history is just absolutely incredible. And he's basically condensed this, just volumes and volumes. You couldn't even imagine. I can't imagine a single human being reading all that, but he has, and condensed it all down, made documentaries, synthesized the information, and he's put it into basically a collection of the very best work. Some of it's documentaries he made, some of it's books he's made, some of it's speeches, stories, fables from history. It's all there. And in one simple, easy product called the Reality Zone, which I think, is it called realityzone.com?
That's exactly it, yeah.
You can go there and you can just get the keys to the kingdom. I would say it's how the world works through fascinating history and stories and parables, and it's brilliant, and it'll help guide you in a lot of your decision making. I hope it certainly has me. So that was my little sales pitch for your reality zone.
Well,
Did I do a good job?
So how much do I owe you?
We'll see. Send me the commission. No,
Okay.
please don't
No,
donate it to the cause.
Thank you for that. Yeah, what you say is certainly true. And just for the record, I have read those books. And now that doesn't mean I remember everything, but I get I have the impression of what I read. When it comes to dates and names and so forth, I may lose those, but I know the lesson. And that's the reason a person should read a history book, is not to remember the dates and the names, but to learn the lessons of history.
With my son, I remember I was so focused on that. Let's learn the lessons of history. And so he didn't understand numbers, so it was worthless telling him a date. He's 7 now. Just in the last year or two, we started getting into dates just so it makes contact. But we would grab a piece of chalk and draw a big, long timeline down the driveway. And we would go, okay, so where's World War I? Like here's the beginning of Earth, and here's you today. And there's there's the timeline. It's like, so I want you to draw in World War II. And he couldn't write either, but he woke up and he'd draw a mark. I'm like, okay, well, what about the War of Independence? He'd go up and he'd draw a mark. And he knew the chronology of all the major wars and the ebbs and flows of power. By the time he was 4, he couldn't understand the dates, couldn't understand the thingers. And it was just, I used to love doing that. And he still absolutely loves history. A student of history, and absolutely loves it. So yeah, history, I mean, it's just so important. Let me think. Okay, I guess I would just love to talk to you for so much longer, but I will leave it soon. But I want to do one more question, and this is the selfish stuff. Is I really want to know. I kind of have some ideas about how the world's going, what's happening, and things like that, and kind of looking over the horizon, those 5-10 years. And I guess on the one hand, I know something you like to do. I like to do it as well. Is always introduce a little bit of hope and some good signs and some things to kind of hang our head on to lift our spirits. But I also want to kind of understand, the reality of the situation as well. So maybe if you could just, so I was like, I guess when I was first exposed to you, you were just used to so many of your things that you taught were conspiracy theories. And it's moving so fast now. I mean, the vast majority of them are conspiracy fact at this point. So what I'm looking for is my next kind of hit of conspiracy theory. What's the things that's happening? What's going to be happening over the next 5-10 years? What's the next parts of their plan that they're going to be trying to implement, at least, that we need to be on the lookout for over the next 5-10 years?
Okay, as long as it's clear that this is all opinion, and all you can do is just create a mental graph in your mind, and you put a dot on the graph of where we were at whatever point, let's say when the nation was founded, and you put a point on the graph as to where we are today in terms of how much freedom we have, in terms of how much government controls we have. And one line goes up like this, the other line goes down like that. And then it's simple. Just put a ruler on that mental graph and extend it into the next 10 years or so. And you can see where we're headed. We're headed to totalitarianism. And we're getting very close to it actually already, because we can't speak our minds. Even when we do a program like this, we have to avoid certain thoughts and certain words, or we get in trouble, or they close down your channel or something. This is not America. And if you look at the 10 amendments to the Constitution, our Bill of Rights, so-called, we've lost all of them except one. And they're working on that one like crazy now, and that's the Second Amendment. All the other amendments have been blatantly violated in the name of public health or anti-terrorism or something like that. And nobody seems to care. They accept it because they're afraid, which is the strategy they use against us. They're afraid, and they'll accept any insult to their liberties or to even their social structure in order to receive some assurance that the government's going to protect them, So with all that in mind, I can see where it's going. And the question is, well, does it have to continue? Well, it doesn't. But that's not your question. You want to know, where's it going if we don't do our job? If we don't do our job, we're going to wind up, the world will wind up in total slavery. 99.9% of the population will be totally at the beck and call of that 1/10 of 1% who will live like absolute monarchs and kings. And the rest of us will be given whatever amenities we earn by our obedience. If we are disobedient or critical, we will be cut off and we won't have any means to survive. We'll have no money. And it's problematic as to how much crypto we may have, because there are ways that totalitarian governments can intervene in everything. And we'll certainly have no freedom of travel. We won't have social credit points on our little cards or chips to be able to buy gas or travel or food or even shelter and clothing. That's where we're headed. And I think that the populations of the world are rapidly awakening to this reality, because it's getting closer and closer and closer. You don't have to look way to the horizon anymore to see it. You can look pretty much straight up and it's right up there, ready to come over our heads. So people are waking up in larger numbers than I have ever seen before. And unfortunately, they don't really understand all the depths of the problem that we're talking about, but they know we've got a problem. And they know that they can't trust the people that they used to trust. And that's a big step forward. It makes our job so much easier. So the question really arises, are we going to do our job in time? I think it's a race for the finish line. Our opponents know full well that people are waking up, and they know that they have to move quickly and tie up everything very quickly before the rest of the people wake up too. They know that the time is limited. So they're pushing so fast that they're making mistakes and they're becoming more and more obvious. So that too is a good sign. So our job is just to mobilize. Now, let me get to the most important point. Mobilize the number of people necessary to push this back. What is the number of people necessary? Now, listen carefully. It took me a long time to figure this out, or to learn it, not to figure it out. Others had figured it out long before me, especially our opponents. All of history has been written by less than 1% of the population. And as I can see it, it works something like this. 1% or less of the population are the thought leaders. Just think of the American Revolution. Those would be the people like Jefferson and Washington and Hamilton, the thought leaders, and Thomas Paine, who wrote the pamphlets. You could count those people on your two hands, or maybe a little bit more than that. Maybe less than 50 people, certainly less than 100 people, were the thought leaders of the American Revolution. And they did what always happens in history. The thought leaders attract around them 15%. Well, no, let me get around 3% of the population, including their 1%. These are the movers and shakers. They're the ones that really dedicate their lives to it and move out and make it happen. And that attracts around them 15%, including the 3% of their own. And those are the people who say, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm all for you. How can I help? And they'll carry out the battle plan. The American Revolution was fought by 15% of the population. That's all. The rest of the people would say, gee, I wonder who's going to win. And if the Crown had won, they would say, oh, we were with you all along. And it's shocking to realize that, because at least I thought in school that all the colonies, all the colonials were on the side of the revolution. No, only 15%, but they made it happen. And on the other side, there's another 1%, 3%, and 15%. Now that takes care of 30%. So we have 70% in the middle that never does anything. It'll just wait to see who's going to win. So now that simplifies our task considerably. We've already got the thought leaders. We got the 1%. We're gathering that 3% right now through movements like Red Pill. But we're also gathering that 15% around it by the same movements. And those people won't be life dedicated to it, but they're there to help us in any way they can because they realize the importance of it. So now we come back to your question. Will we be able to turn this around in time? I think we're approaching the tipping point already. I can see it. I can feel it. I just know that it's happening. I don't know how close we are to it, but I think we're very close to it. So if we don't let up, if we just keep moving ahead, don't get too fearful. Say, no, I'm not going to be scared out of this battle. I'm in it to the end. I'm going all the way. If we can get that mental resolve, then enough of our compatriots, 15% is all we have to reach. We will not be stoppable.
Awesome. Great stuff, Ed. And in terms of the little glimmers of hope and those leaders stepping up, like little things like Elon Musk looking to buy Twitter just to give back a little semblance of free speech in one little domain there. That's just something to be excited about. You just see when you see the Trump movement, just calling the swamp and not differentiating between Republican to Democrat, just calling the swamp what it is. All these little steps, I see it growing. It's there to give us hope, and I feel like that. One of the most impressive things that they do, our enemies, that is they make us feel alone and by ourselves, and that there's no one else who agrees with us so well. And the cool thing about it is just one or two of these little sparks come out, and you just see the people come back. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of people who you thought were disinterested or apolitical or whatever, and all of a sudden they're fighters. And that's just really, really cool to see. I see that all across the board. So, all right, I think we're running out of time here, but thank you so much, Ed. I appreciate that. And yeah, guys, go ahead, make sure you check out Reality Zone. That's Ed's product. I couldn't possibly recommend that any higher. You got the Red Pill Expo. I'll put links to both in the description. Ed, any final thoughts?
Well, I think everything I said was a final thought, but let me think. I guess I just repeat something I said before, and that is don't be discouraged, because every victory, that important victory in the world that's ever been won on the part of freedom, on the freedom side of an issue, has been won by people who refuse to be discouraged. They said, I don't care what the odds are. I'm going to fight. I'm going to make it happen. And that is what tips over the point. If they can convince us to be discouraged and frightened and say, oh, how could we possibly win? We're outnumbered. That's what they want us to think. So the key to victory is to think victory. And if you don't think victory, you're never going to achieve it. So that's my closing thought. All
right. Well, I appreciate it. Ed, again, so glad you're here with us to start with. That just meant a lot to me, and I'm so sorry I didn't know that you were having the health issues, but glad that you're here. Thank you for being here. And I got to remind myself to reach out to you more often to do these interviews more, because we want to get as many of them in there as we can. So thank you, Ed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.